right, good evening, everyone. Our presenter this evening, Bob Thompson, is a retired professor of political science and public administration, as well as university administrator at East Carolina University. He has been collecting stamps and philatelic material for over 60 years. He is a member of the American Philatelic Society and the Royal Philatelic Society of New Zealand, in addition to about a half dozen other philatelic associations. He is a worldwide collector with a primary focus on the US, New Zealand, and the Australian states. All right, so Bob, take it away.
All right. Thank you. And everyone, thank you for being here this evening. This is a presentation I put together initially for the Raleigh Stamp Club. I'm the secretary there. And it was based really on after I went to Antarctica and got interested in it in terms of the stamps. So let me just run you through this and we'll go through and see what questions we have. Let me be not too fast. In many ways, the stamps from Antarctica are semi-postals and topicals. And in large part, they're semi-postal because they are used to generate revenue for both philatelic services and the research efforts that scientists are engaged in. The only people who are residents of Antarctica, aside from penguins and a few other animals, are the scientists and technicians, and they all have to rotate out. No one is allowed to be a permanent resident there, and in large part, they have to rotate out for their mental health, because for the long winter, they're essentially, most of them are inside the research bases. So it becomes a revenue, when you look at how the stamps are used and where they can be used, it's a revenue generation for the philatelic. It is also a postal service for those researchers. The US, the UK, Russia, China presently operate post offices in some of their permanent bases, and then the post offices for France and the Chilean stations operate during the summer when their people are there. Another aspect of the stamps from Australia is it's a kind of a low-cost reinforcement of political and territorial claims. The Falkland Islands War, if you remember back about 40 years ago, was in part not only about the Falkland Islands, it was also about the British claims for territory in South Georgia and on the continent itself. The Antarctica is governed by a treaty system, and the main treaty went in force in 1964. There are currently 54 signatories to it, and it sets aside Antarctica for scientific research, and it bans military activity there. Although there are a couple, like the Chilean military maintains a base there that really becomes kind of the airport for several different groups coming in and out. There are about 26 permanent research stations. And the treaty, interestingly, the signatories did not have to renounce their territorial claims. What they basically just have to do is not act on them. And there are a variety of other recommendations. And if you ever tour Antarctica on a cruise ship, pick a small ship, because the cruise ships are nobody is allowed to put more than 100 people on Antarctica at a time. So if you go on a larger cruise ship that has several hundred people, or one of these really big ones, then your chances of getting onto shore for any period of time are pretty minimal. Wrong way. Now, this is the way Antarctica is divided up. If you'll notice, Chile, Argentina, the United Kingdom, Norway even claims part of the territory, because remember, Amundsen was Norwegian. And Australia, France, New Zealand, Norway claims some more. So there are all these territorial claims. And many stamps have featured Antarctica. They are not just the people, the stamp or the countries that have bases there. Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Chile, a large number of countries have highlighted Antarctica on their stamps, often in terms of some of their individuals who were scientists or explorers, or in support of the International Geodesic Year back in 1957. Here are just some examples. These are the top ones on the left are set from Hungary, as is the one on the top right, which is in honor of the International Geodesic Year in 1957-59, a year that spanned several years in terms of the issuing of stamps. And then this is a British set down there of early explorers. This is an example from the US stamp that was issued in terms of the geodesic year. It's a first day cover, just setting that up. And that year is very important because in the mid-1950s is when scientific research in Antarctica particularly began to take place. There was a great deal of exploration in Antarctica in the early 1900s. That's when Amundsen, Scott, Shackleton, and those various expeditions took place. And then there was basically a lapse. And the main efforts took place in the beginning in the mid-1950s. All right. Come on. Okay. This is another example of celebration of the geodesic year. This is or a later expedition, excuse me. This is a German stamp of a German it's a first day cover of a German expedition that went there in the early 1980s, and the ship that they used. This is an example from Ecuador, which is not exactly close to Antarctica, but some of the penguins and other animals will winter in Ecuador, and in the summer go down to Antarctica. Here's an example of the territorial claims. Come on. Now, this is a stamp from Argentina and a stamp from Chile back in the early 50s. Both of them are countries that right now are jumping off places if you're going to Antarctica. In Chile, you would jump off from Punta Arenas. And in fact, when I went there, what we did was take a plane from Punta Arenas and flew to the Chilean military base. Or the other place is Ushuaia in Argentina, and you sail the Drake Sea, the passage. But if you look carefully, they're claiming the same territory, because they've just both made a triangle down towards the north of the South Pole and claim parts of that territory. And when you look at them in terms of the British and that, you'll see that they're all three claiming the same kind of territory. Now, this is an example from Argentina, again, illustrating both, in a sense, the wildlife from Antarctica, as well as their presence there. And it's celebrating a ship that went. And this is a more recent Argentinian stamp from 2007, 2008, emphasizing, again, that political claim more than anything else. It's a nice little souvenir sheet, but yeah. The most famous US example from the exploration is the second bird expedition. And there's a recent article in the United States Specialist from last summer that goes into detail on Admiral Byrd and Roosevelt's involvement in creating this stamp and using the revenues from it to help pay for parts of the Byrd expedition. So one of this is an example from the National Postal Museum of the safe that was used. And this was a really big philatelic effort. This is an example from a photo from the post office that the U.S. set up in Antarctica and operated for more than during 2 years of operation. And over 150,000 items were canceled there. So the initial stamps were canceled here. And they got confused and actually canceled some on 2 different days. So if you get a canceled stamp, check it out in terms of the date and where it was actually sent from. And then this is the Antarctic stamp, which we issued in the United States in 1971, commemorating the 10th year of the initial Antarctic Treaty. So, and then this is a Cinderella. Just noting the research station, the Palmer Station, Antarctica, was not used for any philatelic purpose other than as a label. The stamps that come from Antarctica itself are issued, by the countries that maintain research stations there and claim ownership of parts of Antarctica or some nearby islands. And there are basically 4 major groups. There's the British Antarctic Territory, the Australian Antarctic Territory, the French Southern Antarctic Territory, and then the Ross Dependency, which is New Zealand. Not all, in fact, the other territorial claimants, of which they're, Norway, Chile, Argentina, do not issue stamps from Antarctica. They may issue stamps on it, but not from it in the same way. Let's start with the French Southern Arctic territories or lands. This is an example. This is the first one that was issued. It's a very common stamp. You can find it in lots of just getting a packet of stamps from France, and it's often in there. These territories are the ones that are least connected to Antarctica. France maintains the smallest footprint, and the stamps were initially administered, or this territory was initially administered from Madagascar, then Reunion. It's now administered directly from Paris. And it includes 5 groups of islands. Some of these islands are around Madagascar. They're not associated really with Antarctica. And most of them are uninhabited areas. In the French territory, there are about 300 military and research personnel during the summer. They don't maintain any permanent residence. And the first stamps were issued overprints on Madagascar stamps. The total number of their stamps to date is a little over 600. So it's a manageable topic if that's what you're seeking to collect. These are the islands that form part of that group. That's why I say they're not really necessarily close to Antarctica. And these down here are basically outcroppings. And this thin red line at the base is the territory. It's the smallest of the claimed territories. These are the stamps that were issued in honor of the International Geophysical Year in 1957. They were pretty design. Notice it's the same design, just in different color and different value. The Australian Antarctic Territory is a large one. This is the first stamp that was issued. It was issued in honor of the Mawson expedition in 1908 and 9. And the Australian territory, see, this is the French one down here, this little sliver, and this is the Australian area that they claim. So Australia is up here, New Zealand is really, Australia is here, excuse me, and New Zealand's here, and this is the tip of South America over here. And then South Africa is up here to orient you. Excuse me. These are Cinderellas that were issued in terms of for the 1954 expedition. That was Australia's first major expedition for scientific purposes. Again, if you'll notice, there's no value marking on them, and they're relatively inexpensive to acquire. They're not too bad at all. If I could find a green one with it and have a little tear, I'd like it. The Australian territory, as I said, is one of the largest. It was originally called Victoria Land by Britain and given to Australia in 1933. The Australians also monitor the seas between Antarctica and southern Australia for whaling. So they have responsibility of that. This area has it varies widely, but a summer population between 80 and 200. They've been issuing stamps since 1957, and there are about 300 of those that have been issued. And those stamps, unlike some of the others, can be used in Australia and its territories. So the Australian Antarctic Territory stamps could be used actually in Australia for postage. And this set is the least expensive to collect. This is an example of a souvenir sheet. You can see the rather colorful, and it exhibits different activities that what the scientists would do in different expeditions. And this is a first day cover from that first expedition, issued in postmarked actually in 1959, even though the stamps were issued slightly before that. Now, this is from the British Antarctic Territory. Does anyone notice what's distinct about this particular cover? All right. This was issued in 1968, so this is before the Falkland Islands War. Okay. And the stamp was sent by the base commander to this person with British stamps, and then somewhere along the line, it passed through Argentinian Postal Service, and they put their claim for the Argentinian islands on it. And this is an example of a British Antarctic Territory first day cover from 1971, again celebrating the 10th year anniversary of the initial treaty. And what you'll see is when you mail something from Antarctica for the British, the individual research station issues a postmark, and then it is sent to Port Stanley in the Falkland Islands for distribution into the international postal system from there. So all the mail will go up through the Falkland Islands, which is actually the administrative home for the British Antarctic Territory stamps. The British territory was created in 1962 from the former dependencies of the Falkland Islands. It encompasses a pretty substantial part of territory. And actually, as part of the 60th anniversary or Jubilee for Queen Elizabeth, they renamed the southern part of the territory for Queen Elizabeth. It only has a summer population of about 250. And as I said, the Philatelic Islands, or the Falklands Islands Philatelic Bureau serves as the administrative agent for the stamps from there. And the first issue from the British was in 1963. And then stamps on first aid covers, as I said, are issued by the relevant research base and then pushed to Port Stanley. These stamps are largely sold to collectors like ourselves overseas, and they have issued about over 600 of them. This set is the most expensive. They're the most expensive of the four major issuing countries to collect. But they're still a manageable size. This is another first aid cover on the Silver Jubilee. In this case, it was the 25th anniversary. And this is a cover in honor of a research or a ship, the John Biscoe, that was built in Paisley, and they issued a cover for this ship, which was then used for research and transportation into the Falklands and into the Antarctic territories. Now, New Zealand. These are the two earliest stamps, and they have an interesting little bit of history to them. The first one was issued called Victorialand, and before he left, for his first expedition, Robert Scott was appointed New Zealand postmaster, and they issued two stamps were issued, a 1/2 penny green King Edward VII, and this 1 penny Dominion stamp. Only about 2,400 of the 1/2 penny stamp were produced initially. And if you get one of those, you have something for which you've paid a good deal of money. But they did issue overprinted about 2,400 stamps with Victorian, and Scott carried about over 23,000 of those, on his initial expedition. They're not, they're a little bit costly, but not too bad. And in 1908, before Shackleton's expedition, he was appointed postmaster. And his stamps were overprinted with King Edward VII name. And again, he took about 23,000 of these penny universals on his 1907-1909 expedition. He did not reach what was then called King Edward VII Land, but he did establish a base on McMurdo Sound. And in 1912, for that expedition, another 2,400 stamps were overprinted, and not a little over 1,900 were carried on that expedition. Now, if you remember, Shackleton's boat sank. It was caught in the ice. He and his men stayed on the ice until it was breaking up, and then they really a rather fascinating story of how they sailed to another island, and then Shackleton and a couple others made it to the South Georgia Islands, and nobody died during the expedition. This is a brief history that was written in 1912 of the expedition. And it basically now wants to fall apart in my hands when I pick it up. It's fragile enough. But it contains some very interesting photos, of which when you, if you look at any of the books on Shackleton, tend to be repeated, showing the ship, the men, and various things. But it also contained a copy of the sheet of stamps with Shackleton's signature at the top. Now, when Shackleton came back, what he did was sell the stamps to a dealer who published this book. And that dealer purchased all of the remaining King Edward VII stamps, which is how they basically got back into circulation for the rest of us. So that's early 1900s. The next New Zealand part becomes really not active until 1957. And it becomes known as Ross Dependency, which includes what was part of the Victoria Land, the Ross Island Shelf, Ross Island, several other islands. And Christchurch is the main jumping off point for researchers that are going to this area. And it's also, and this is the site for most of the US research that goes off into Antarctica, is through Christchurch. They began issuing stamps in 1957, then in 1967, 72, and 82, and since 1994 annually. They issue about 5 to 6 stamps at the end of the year. They're among the last issues for the calendar year. And they have issued thus far about 190 stamps, including mini sheets. The stamps are not valid for use in New Zealand, unlike the Australian ones. These are not. And the profits that arise from selling these stamps go to support the research there. So the only ones who can use these stamps are researchers on New Zealand, on the Ross Dependency, who are sending mail back to their home. So if you get a cover for that, there aren't too many people who are going to be sending them. So you've got not a rare, but at least an uncommon activity. This is a postcard from the first day of issue. You can see that a stamp dealer was the one who arranged to put the stamps on and then have it postmarked and sent to him. And this is a cover, again, from the Scott base in 1960-61 from the Ross Dependency. And this is another example of the kinds of covers you see. I mean, this is just a mimeographed cachet that was created and used by the people that were at the Ross Dependency at the time on Campbell Island. They do issue beautiful stamps. This is one of my favorite from the Ross Dependency, with sea creatures. And if you remember, taking these photos means you've got to be diving under the sea or using elaborate camera work to see what the sea creatures under the ice shelf look like. And it's a beautiful collection. This is the first day cover. This is an example of one of the stamps covers from the United States. And we just used the basic postage at the time, the Eisenhower stamp in 1972, but it was sent from the McMurdo station in Antarctica. So this was a U.S. researcher sending it back or somebody at least sending it back from the U.S. side. Here's another example using the treaty stamp, and it was from the deep freeze of 1973, and it was the studying the glacier, or U.S. Geological Service. Come on. I like this particular cover because of the juxtaposition of terrains. This is a cover, again, sent from an operation in Antarctica, and the person used the beach stamps from early 1970s. So that foursome with the beach scene sent from Antarctica, I thought was at least a little bit of irony. At this point, I would like to show you my most expensive Antarctic cover, but I can't find it. I did mail a postcard to my grandchildren and myself when I was in Antarctica. It went through, it was on the British side, so it went through. It took about 6 months to arrive, but somewhere I have filed it in my magnificent filing system, and I have no idea where it is now. But it would have cost, that's about a $10,000 cover. I should be able to find it somewhere. And what I've ended with, and you can access from the presentation, are sites for if you're interested in Antarctica. There are several various associations. There is an association of philatelists who are interested in Antarctica, and then there are some from the different countries as well. So that's just there for you, for your information, and there are some resources. There's the penguin. All right. I'll turn this off, and I'll be happy to entertain any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you, Bob. That was definitely very interesting. See stamps from a place that really isn't a country. Did have one question that came in through the chat. It says, Bob, thank you for the presentation. The annual Ross dependency issues, I can't imagine they receive much postal use from Antarctica. Do you think sales to collectors make these viable to produce year after year?
Apparently they do. And I say that because the New Zealand has made tactical decisions about what it can and cannot continue to afford. If you remember, New Zealand would issue for a number of years health stamps, semi-postal stamps that would support various health issues. And it several years ago ceased doing those. So they must think that issuing the Ross dependency stamps at least generates a sufficient amount of revenue to continue. Not many covers come from there, but they must at least find enough of us who are willing to buy them. I buy 5 sets a year, so I may be helping out more than I realize.
All right, another question. Are there stamps from South Georgia?
There are. Those were South Georgia was the Falkland Islands dependency, and as long as that was the main thrust, there are stamps that you can find from there. But once I think they ceased being issued. I'm not a Falklands specialist, so I don't know for sure, but I think the South Georgia parts stopped when they went under the British Antarctic Territory. That may need to be, that's a good point to check.
Let's go to Louis Morel, and then we'll come back to the chat questions. Go ahead, Louis.
Good evening. Excuse me. I have 2 questions for you, Bob. The first one was alluded to. Is it possible that many of these stamps are worth more in a catalog if they were postally used as opposed to in mint condition?
I would think so, especially if you were able to get some of those from King Edward VII Island and that, but there were so few of those. I don't know that I've actually ever seen one. But
Okay.
I think, I would not be surprised, but I don't know the definitive answer to your question.
Okay. The second question is asking clarification on your $10,000 scheme. Can you explain what you did to, I missed the strategy there. You mailed a letter to yourself via Antarctica?
Yes, the cruise trip that we were on, we flew from Punta Arenas in Chile to the Chilean military base. And then we picked up a very small cruise ship. And we sailed basically along the peninsula, pointing up towards South America. And we did a variety of activities. We did manage to get onto Antarctica. And that ship, which was run by, at that time, the Quark expeditions, and they still operate. When we were there, it would not stop at the British research base, but there were other trips that it would stop. So they would allow us to purchase postcards, put the stamps on, and then they would mail them when they stopped at that place. So that's what they did. We put the stamps on, put the postcards together, and then they took them whenever they managed to stop there. And then that went through the postal system. That's why I say it was about a $10,000 postcard.
I see. Okay, because of the cost of the cruise.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so it was a British Antarctica stamp that was on the postcard.
Yeah. It was about a 50-cent postcard and about a 50-cent stamp, but
Yes.
it's expensive to get there.
And it went from the station probably to Port Stanley, then on to London, and eventually ended up somewhere. Well, you're in Greenville.
Yes. I did receive it, and my grandkids received those, but it took 4 to 6 months.
Yeah, amazing. All right, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, going back to the chat, comments on the map. I didn't see any U.S. claims. So I guess follow-on question would be, has the U.S. made any claims to Antarctic territory?
No.
All right, kind of a little bit further down, but kind of related to this, I saw a question. How do countries determine their territorial ownership?
They basically just made a claim. Like, in Chile and Argentina, they weren't particularly involved in the early research efforts or the early exploratory efforts. So if you look, they just extended, in a sense, their territory down from their point on South America. The Norwegians were heavily involved in the early exploration. And in fact, it was Amundsen who made the first arrival at the South Pole. So that was the basis for their claims. And the British claims are basically on the same kind of format. They were the early explorers. So they just claimed the territory.
Okay. See, somebody asked, Bob, what was your reason for going to Antarctica?
I hadn't been there. I mean, it's really that simple. I was visiting a friend, and he said, "You want to go to Antarctica with me?" I said, and I looked over at my wife, and I said, "Yes."
Yeah, good deal. Not very many people can say they've been to Antarctica. So, yeah.
When we were there, we were on the ship held less than 100 people. But I did manage to see a large cruise ship. It wasn't one of these 5,000-7,000 ones, but it had several thousand, probably, passengers. And I did manage to see a place where somebody had anchored smaller sailboats that they had sailed in, and people could come and rent and then sail around in parts of Antarctica during the summer. That had to be a really expensive vacation. But there were like 3 of them berthed together in a small harbor. And that's what, that's what their purpose was, just as for tourists.
Let's see, comment, love the covers, but some of those Ross dependency issues were certainly well designed. Great job by Bob, greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Somebody asked a question about how much does an annual set cost?
They're probably under $25. They're not terribly expensive.
Yeah.
And that's in a presentation packet. That's not just the stamps. And the presentation packet would usually have some mini sheets as well. So they're not terribly expensive. They're actually about the most affordable of the sets to purchase. Or Australia's the least expensive, but the New Zealand's very close to it. So,
Let's see. My wife's great uncle was in the bird, is it two? Yeah, two expedition. I have a number of covers. One was from Little America, Antarctica, 1935. Where is Little America?
Little America, I'm not going to go back and pull. If I remember correctly, that's the name of the base that they had, and it was closer to the South American side of, and I believe a little further down that main peninsula. I mean, I'm looking at that article I mentioned just to see if it has the map. And I'm wrong. They used the Ross dependency side, the other side of Antarctica, on the McMurdo Bay area.
Okay, and that kind of leads into the next question. Coincidentally, the U.S. does research in the Ross area. What kind of agreement do they have? Does the U.S. have to do research there? How are they permitted?
The U.S. and the New Zealand's have had a close working relationship from the beginning of it. I don't honestly know what kind of technical treaty or arrangements, but it's a very close working relationship. And that's one I'll try to find and put in a chat response after we're done.
Okay. Say, Bob, do you collect the occasional limited edition Ross dependency issues from New Zealand Post?
Do I collect them?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I have an actual subscription to all the stamps issued from New Zealand, so they're automatically sent to me.
Okay, there are a couple of other comments. Thank you. I need to do much more research. Very interesting presentation. I learned a lot. Thank you. And another thank you. That is all from the chat. Does anybody that's with us live have something they want to ask?
Bob,
Frederick Lawrence wants to speak.
Bob, you showed a cover from Campbell Island, and the franking is New Zealand stamps, not New Zealand dependency or Ross Island dependency. Can you speak a little bit as to what's going on there? Why would New Zealand stamps be used instead of dependency or territory stamp?
I have to remember when that, let me go back. I've got my other slide here. Let me look to see if I can pull up the date of that cover. That cover was mailed prior to New Zealand doing the Ross dependency stamps. So the New Zealand stamps at that point themselves would have been valid.
Great. Anybody else have a question for Bob? All right, if not, I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Diane, who's going to tell us about a few things coming up that LASO is doing.
Hi, good evening, everyone. And thank you very much, Bob, for that wonderful and informative presentation. I enjoyed it. We have posted our evaluation for this presentation in the chat and would appreciate your completion and any feedback that you can give us. And if you want to complete it a bit later, you can just click on it right now. It will open up in your browser. And when you log off here or later on this evening, you can fill it out and hit send it back. Our next LASO meeting is going to be Tuesday, July 15th, and Edward Zuckerman is going to be presenting Disputed Territories on Stamps. Then on Tuesday, August 19th, we'll have a presentation by Jeffrey Shapiro entitled An Overview of the German Inflation Stamps. So we hope to see you all then. You can find a full list of our upcoming programs along with any recordings of prior presentations that you may have missed just by going to the LASO website, learningabout.stamps.com or .org, learningabout.stamps.org, and just click on programs and it'll bring you to the upcoming programs as well as the ones that have been prior to this. And that's all the announcements that I have. Anton? Back to you.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Bob. Very great presentation. Excuse me. Let me just mention one thing. Ed Zuckerman's doing a presentation, as Diane said, on July 15th on maps on stamps.
Ooh.
And it's going to be disputed territories, maps on stamps. And Bob, you kind of rolled right into that when you started showing the map of Antarctica and the various claims and countries putting those claims on stamps. So Ed has stamps from around the world, but that's a kind of a foreshadows the July 15th program. I want to thank everybody for coming. I'm going to cut off the Zoom here, but if anybody wants to hang out and chat, we can do that. Again, thank you very much, Bob, for a wonderful presentation. We appreciate it.
Yeah, you're most welcome.
Take care.